Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and sometimes other stuff they're involved in. My guest today has been dedicated to martial arts for over 5 decades. Throughout his extensive career, has trained in a variety of styles, including Jiu Jitsu and White Lotus Kung Fu. From 1980 to 85, he was the head Jiu Jitsu instructor at UCLA, and from 84 to 87, taught Jiu Jitsu at Steven Seagal's Tenshin Dojo. He also won the first ever BJJ competition held in the U.S. in 1994. In 1999, he partnered with John Will to develop comprehensive grappling and MMA curriculums. These curriculums, available in manuals, videos, and DVDs, have been adopted by nearly 1,000 martial arts schools globally, including a customized version for Chuck Norris and his UFAF association. And this curriculum remains in use in many schools today. He taught seminars worldwide, sharing his expertise with martial artists, law enforcement, and military personnel. He's the author of Training for Competition, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Submission Grappling, and co-author of The Triangle with Higan Machado. Beyond martial arts, he's a passionate advocate for animal welfare. He co-founded AdoptAPet.com, Humane America Animal Foundation, as well as Food System Innovations. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. David Meyer. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for that great intro. It's great to speak with you, Brian.
I appreciate your time. I truly do. I know it's everyone has busy schedules, so anytime someone's willing to take the time to chat on the show, I truly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I know you said you've listened to a few episodes, so you kind of know how we get things going. I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first interest came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
Well, so my first introduction to martial arts was as a young child. It was actually my brother, who was 3 years older than me. I think he was around 9 years old, was having some issues with bullies. I was 6 years old. And we had a cousin who was a black belt. She was a black belt under a guy named Jack Secchi, who was kind of a local legend in Southern California. He taught a jiu-jitsu class, sort of his own style of jiu-jitsu, at a place called Valley College, which was a local community college. And so she suggested that we come down and start taking some jiu-jitsu classes. So I really just came along for the ride. As a 6-year-old kid, it wasn't that I had an interest in that time. I just suddenly found myself in this fairly traditional, quite structured jiu-jitsu class with this half Japanese, half American, very, very serious, very tough guy named Jack Secchi. And I liked it, and I was a little scared, but also liked the toughness of everybody and stuck with it.
When your brother started, did you start right away with him, or did you watch a couple classes first before you decided to jump in?
I was very young. My recollection is we just were placed into the classes.
Okay.
We started at the same time, and we got the belt ranking system there was like white, yellow, green. We both got our yellow at the same time, and I think both got our green, and then he dropped out. That would have been a couple of years later, and I just stayed with it.
As you got old enough to make your own choice, you had been in it a couple of years, but then what was it about it that made you want to keep going? What kind of drew you in about it?
So that's interesting because it's so much a part of me that the thought of not wanting to keep going, I can't even remember that. But if I really look back as a kid, I know what I liked about it was there were these authority figures, these black belts, including, Sensei Secchi, but also his black belts who were kind of awe-inspiring. It was a little scary because they were very intense, but you knew that deep down they were very nice. Like I never saw anybody be mean, but they demanded a lot out of us. And it was always like, hi sensei, and, it's just snap into position and shut up. And something about that structure and their toughness appealed to me, and the thought that these guys are on my side and like I could be tough like that. And I know that Sensei Secchi had kind of an ethic that really stuck with me, which is that, when people need help, you are the help. Meaning you might need to call a police officer, or there's a good time to call an ambulance or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, you don't outsource that heroism. Like, you are the help. Like, it's your role to be the help. When you walk down the street or when you walk into a room, without anybody else knowing it, they are safer because you are there. And something about that kind of superhero do-gooder mentality really appealed to me.
That's impressive as a kid to kind of remember that and stuff. I mean, to me, I would be like, that's a lot of pressure. Like, wow.
Yeah. But I really think it was like, I wanted to be like them. Like, I wanted to be, in a sense, I wanted them to have my back. Like, I knew if I was a really good student, then when I went to school, I had these friends, these strong, powerful people that were like my people, my secret weapon that I could call on. I had this like secret power.
Okay. Do you remember that? You said you were like 6 when this happened. So do you remember any recollection of martial arts before that? Did you ever remember seeing it like on TV or movies, or was that your first real experience with martial arts?
It had to have been my first experience, because, I mean, we're talking, I was born in 62, so we're talking in 68. So this was, before Bruce Lee, before really any of the pop culture things going on. I may have seen like a demonstration of that class, because my cousin had trained there.
Yep.
And I also remembered the story that she was attacked at some point and fought off 2 guys, put them in the hospital.
Wow.
And that always like stuck out in my mind, like, wow, this is where you can become really a great fighter. But no, I don't think I had much influence on that. Like I say, I was just sort of shuffled into it, really probably out of convenience for my parents, because if they were taking my brother, they might as well take me.
Right. Okay. Once you started that as a kid, did you get involved at a young age with any other sports in school, or was it pretty much strictly martial arts?
So I did other sports back then. Baseball, like t-ball was the thing. This was sort of before soccer. And so I did baseball at school. And it's interesting, as I progressed in Jiu Jitsu, it wasn't that I didn't have problems with bullies at school too, because when I got into school, I did as well. And my Jiu Jitsu was there for me. I remember one time some kids like trying to corner me in a hallway and not let me pass. And I needed to walk through, and they kept making grabs at me. And I was doing just basic evasions from my Japanese jiu-jitsu, and it worked perfectly well. They couldn't touch me.
Nice.
And there were other times as well. So it wasn't that I wasn't scared. In fact, I'm one of those people who sort of credits being bullied as a kid as being a driver of why I try to excel.
Mm-hmm.
But I never was beaten up. In fact, I never lost a fight as a kid. And yet I always felt scared and intimidated, and so stuck with the martial arts. But also, I remember in 9th grade, just in regular school, was I guess they call it middle school now around here, but we used to call it junior high. There was there was the PE teacher, a former football player, a guy named Pedersen, Coach Pedersen. And he was really into physical fitness. And I remember when I first got there, I couldn't do, even with my jiu-jitsu stuff, I mean, we did some physical fitness stuff, but I was a kid and I couldn't do pull-ups. And I watched him just doing pull-ups and stuff, and I kind of committed to get into shape. And by 9th grade, and he became like a mentor to me.
Okay.
And by 9th grade, I could pop off 25 pull-ups. In 9th grade, I could do push-ups, and that really instilled in me sort of a physical fitness ethic.
Nice.
That I carried through high school and ran track and things like that.
What'd you run track? What'd you do? Which events?
440. Again, this is weird. This is back when it was yards and not meters.
Oh.
440 and 880, basically quarter mile, half a mile were my events.
Okay.
Yeah.
My son was a runner. That's why I asked. So he did distance though. He did like the mile or the relay, and he did cross country and stuff. So
they had alternate seasons for track and cross country, and I did do cross country, and that was like a 3-mile race where I lived. And I was never that good, and in fact, I could never win because I was cursed that both in track and in cross country, 2 separate guys, we had the city's best runner at my high school. Which meant the best I could ever do was second place, because I would never beat that guy, but it kept me humble.
I get that. So how long did you stay at that first jiu-jitsu school you started at?
So I stayed with Jack Secchi until about the time I went into high school. Then, I just got busy with life. This was at community center. And then at some point, I think after high school, right when I started college and started teaching at UCLA, I went back and reconnected with Sensei Seki and continued to work with him and teach there. And then I remained in contact with him until he passed away.
Okay. And did you ever get involved in the competition side back then?
So, well, not as a kid, there were no competitions in jiu-jitsu. There was judo.
Okay.
And we trained a bit of judo, but I never competed in judo. But once I got to college, I started teaching. There was a jiu-jitsu class. When I enrolled in UCLA and came in as a freshman, I looked for martial arts there. And there was a jiu-jitsu class being taught by Danzanryu instructors. That's a style formed by a guy named Henry Okazaki in Hawaii. And that became apparent art for a lot of the stylists on the West Coast here, including Professor Wally J, who you may have heard of in Small Circle Jiu-Jitsu. He came out of the Okazaki Danzanryu school. And so it was a Danzanryu club, but when I came there, I guess they recognized that I had a lot to offer, and they had me become a teacher there as well, which was fine. And so at that time, there were starting to be some competitions. There was kata style competitions, in jiu-jitsu, which I never liked. It was you show up with your partner, and then they give attacks, and your partner gives the attack, but they're just, trying to make you look good on your response to the attack.
Okay.
But they also did have kumite tournaments. They called it kumite. And that was basically kickboxing with throws and some time on the groundwork. And I did that.
Nice.
I remember winning some of those, not winning some, getting a lot of lumps. At that time, I started connecting with a training partner of mine who became a training partner for a number of years, whose name was Steve Copping. Steve was an amazing guy. He had been a German kickboxing champion in Europe and then came back and had studied jiu-jitsu with a guy named George Kirby, who was a student of Jack Seki's. And George Kirby is known by some people. He wrote some books.
Okay.
And he and I became fast friends because he was tough and cared about fighting really well, and so did I. And we used to just beat the crap out of each other. And and that was the time when I went to Kumite stuff. And I miss Steve. He unfortunately passed away from AIDS quite a few years ago. But he was a wonderful guy and ran a great program and also created great martial arts. So it was really with him that I started competing and hitting really hard and really getting into that.
When you first started then in jiu-jitsu, did you guys actually work on kicking in class then, or did that not come till later?
Most of what Sensei Seki taught was grappling. There were a few strikes. There would be like heel of palm strikes and front snap kicks. I don't recall ever learning any kind of, spinning kicks or side kicks or anything like that. As a kid in jiu-jitsu, it was more like kind of, I think he maybe had a kind of a karate background as well. So it was sort of very, very linear.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying heel of palm, front snap kick, things like that. It wasn't until I, just for the fun of it, joined some friends in Kung Fu in high school. I had some friends that wanted to study Kung Fu. At this time, Bruce Lee was well known.
Yeah.
And we went and found a local school run by a guy named Doug Long, who's quite amazing. And he had a phenomenal exhibition team where they would do, weapons and just these amazing choreographed stuff that was just dazzling. It was electrifying. And so that was cool. I never really thought of it as fighting. I thought of it as just cool. And that's where I spent years in, deep horse stances and learning tiger forms and, crane forms and things like that, which I thought was fun. And that was my exposure to, crescent kicks and spinning kicks and side kicks and things like that.
And how long did you study the Kung Fu?
All throughout high school and maybe for a year or two into college. And then I just didn't have time anymore. I think I got from it what I wanted, which was the physical fitness and the balance that came from the forms. He used to put us up on, he filled like coffee, I don't know what the size, like a 1 pound coffee tin they used to have. And he filled them with concrete and we would stand on them for balance and do like one-legged forms and stuff like that.
Fun.
And if you fell off, he would scream like, "Don't break the can." Obviously you could break your leg falling off of those things. But he's like, "No, your leg will heal, but the can will heal."
Nice.
But also we did a lot of hand trapping stuff.
Okay.
And soft hands. And I still use that today in fighting and in jiu-jitsu. That I think was maybe the most valuable thing I got out of those years.
Okay.
Was the flowing and the ability to trap hands.
I'm assuming since the styles were so different, it was not that difficult to cross-train at the same time, doing jiu-jitsu and kung fu at the same time?
Not at all. Totally different. And Doug and his people always thought that it was really cool that I did jujitsu. Sometimes they would ask me to show some stuff. And at that time, I was with Seki for a while, and he wouldn't have cared at all. He always encouraged people to go do other styles, but they were radically different. It's funny because I remember one day, Sifu Wang said, okay, on Thursday night, we're going to start fighting class. And I'm like, ooh, cool. Now we're going to get to like put into practice these forms, and these deep stances and crane kicks and tiger paws and all this kind of stuff. And on that Thursday night, he handed out, kickboxing gloves, and we started, doing round kicks and jab cross hook. And I just had to laugh like, well, if this is fighting class, why have I been doing forms for the last, 3 years? Because you couldn't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was fun and I appreciated it.
Did you ever do any competition for the kung fu side?
No, I don't recall there were. There must have been competitions again where they'd be judging you on forms and things like that. But no, I never did that.
Okay.
My real competition, my intense competition, didn't start until I started with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay. And you mentioned teaching, when you were at college. What drew you to the teaching side of martial arts? Is that something you wanted to do, or one day your instructor said, hey, you're teaching class today? How did that kind of start for you?
Well, no, I wasn't drawn to teach. I did have a black belt. I didn't have a school, never intended to. I was then became a student at UCLA. I just wanted to work out. And when I showed up at that class, I remember they were doing like some tests, like they were putting you in a position and seeing how many seconds it would take you to get out of it. And I could escape from them like really quickly, like less than a second. And it wasn't because I was that good. It was because I think they were primarily practiced in kata, and I had been doing kumite and fighting with my buddy Steve. And so I think they were impressed that I had some practical skills maybe that they didn't have or that they wanted to lock into. And they asked me to teach, and I was happy to do it. And I was also very happy to learn their stuff, which I found very interesting. But so it was more, I wanted to have access to people I could train with. So if I could take some of these people and, get them kind of training the way I wanted to train a bit more realistically, it was sort of just, I guess, a selfish thing.
Okay.
I mean, I was happy to teach. And I've since learned the value of teaching, which is, I think, just extraordinarily amazing to deepen your knowledge of your art. Mm-hmm. But it was simply that they asked me to teach and I wanted to have people to work out with. And so that's what I did.
Perfect. There you go. And I know I had mentioned you had gotten involved in BJJ after years later. Was there any other styles before BJJ that you tried out?
Not seriously.
Okay.
When you're in the martial arts world, as I was at that time, a lot of people. For example, I became friends around that time with Professor Wally J. He became a mentor. And he had his small circle association, which was very pollinated. He had Arnes people, and he had American, Kempo Karate, and he had Judo and Willie Cahill's association. And he had, I was an Olympic judo coach. And so through there, I went to and taught at like martial arts camps and things alongside of people teaching Aikido and Arnis, Filipino stick fighting and all kinds of things. And that's when I met Dan Inosanto. So nice. I had exposure to lots of stuff. I mean, that was the beauty of living in Los Angeles and growing up there, like in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, we had the Jet Center, we had Inosanto Academy. Eventually we had the Gracies, the Machados coming. I mean, it was a real phenomenal center for martial arts. But I didn't train, other than seminars and okay. working out with various people. I didn't train. And funny thing is, at the time when I first heard of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was wanting to to really now branch out and really devote myself to a new art. And the art I had chosen was Muay Thai. Oh. And I think that would have been great. And I had started to take a couple of classes, and it was just killer workouts. Mm-hmm. We just like the throwing, 20 repeat, leg kicks to the point that you're feeling nauseous from throwing the kick, from so much kick, jump, kick, jump, kick, jump, kick, jump. But that was right at the time when I discovered the Gracies, and I decided I was so impressed with the Machado brothers, so I got connected with it. That's where I would place my focus.
Okay. And back up just a little bit. I mentioned in the intro, but how did you end up getting involved teaching at Steven Seagal's Tenshin Dojo? How did that come about?
So I was, as I mentioned, the head instructor at UCLA. Mm-hmm. And the years I was in college was 1980 to around 85. I stayed an extra half a year. And in 1984, the Olympics came to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And as part of needing facilities for the Olympics took over all of UCLA's athletic facilities. So we lost, for that summer, we were not going to have access to our mat to keep our Jiu Jitsu club essentially going. And so I just opened the phone book. I lived in the San Fernando Valley, which is just over the hill from UCLA. And I started looking for, well, are there judo schools, that we could maybe just rent some space from and keep our jiu-jitsu class going? I needed mats is what I needed. Mm-hmm. And there was something not far from me, this thing, Tenshin Dojo, which I believe means heart in heaven. And I'd never heard of it. It was Aikido school. And, I'd lived in LA my entire life, and I had never heard of that. And so I called, and they mentioned to me something like it's a new school, and there's this guy, Seagal, who was a first American Aikido master and had just returned from Japan and opened up this school and might consider renting out some space since, he didn't yet have large classes. And so they said I should come down and meet him and bring a partner to, demonstrate with. So I grabbed one of my black belt friends, a guy named Tim, and we went down there, I think it was a Sunday morning, to this warehouse. It was basically a warehouse that had been converted to a dojo, and had never heard of it. It was nondescript, little sign over the door. It was probably only been in operation for maybe 2 months. When we looked in on the mat space, it was gorgeous. It was tatami. There was a Shinto shrine, an altar. It was very, very classical looking and spacious and just exactly what we needed. Mm-hmm. And we sat in this waiting room just inside the front door. And I remember we were sitting on a couch and the sun was streaming in through the open front door. And then suddenly the room darkened. And we looked up why is it dark? And there was this really big man who was filling up the doorway such that it blocked out all the light. And that was Steven Seagal at the time, but Steven Seagal. Mm-hmm. And we met him, and he was very serious and, pretty intimidating guy, but he let us work out. He let me do some stuff to him, and he was impressed. And he said, yeah, I think this is high quality. You guys can rent space and do classes after my classes. And I did that for years.
Nice. That's really cool. Did you stay in touch with him at all, or?
I taught there for several years, and that was an interesting experience. That was obviously what he was trying to break into the movies, and then did. Mm-hmm. So he had quickly became Aikido sensei to the stars. He was teaching private lessons to Ricky Lee Jones, a musician, to Jackson Brown. Lots of interesting people sort of came through there. And I saw some amazing stuff. I got to say, Steven Seagal was legitimately phenomenal Aikidoist.
Yeah.
If people would come in there, Aikido sort of demands a little bit of, rushing towards you or something. But legitimately, if he hooked his finger around your wrist, you are going to fly through the wall. I mean, for sure. Because he had so much body mass and so much movement. He was really, really, I got to say, legitimately, amazingly good at Aikido. Then he did the first movie, Above the Law. He invited me, and we sat together at the premiere at what was then called Grauman's Chinese Theater. Nice. Now it's, I think, Mann's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And then he got busy, right? So at that point, he became a star. I was doing other things. And at some point, not too long after that, I left teaching there because another spot opened up that was a little better for me to teach at. It was like a fencing center, and they had a room, and it was less expensive. And I think his classes were getting so full at that point, he didn't really need us renting space from him anymore. And so I stayed in touch over maybe a few years after that, but we lost touch. So I've not spoken to him since the UFC, and I know he's gotten involved in a lot of different stuff, and I have not spoken to him in all these many years.
That's still pretty cool, though. I mean, to see that from the beginning and being there basically when he launched his career and seeing his, I don't like getting controversial on the show, but I know a lot of people out there, give him crap and don't think he's legitimate. And I've talked to people that have worked out with him and been on the mat with him, and everyone I've talked to that has actually met him and trained with him says he's legit. He knows what he's doing. So that's cool to hear it again.
He was legit at that time. I mean, this is decades ago.
Yeah.
You know, people, I don't know how in shape or how he's, you know, if he stays, but at that time he was 100% legit.
Nice.
Like I said, you would, if you pushed at him or you came at him, you would go flying.
Nice. Now you'd mentioned, of course, being in, you know, Southern California and so many different styles of martial. I know I lived out there 96, 97, and there were so many schools and back then. So when you decided to go for BJJ, how did you choose your school for that? You obviously had probably a lot of options at that time.
So the school chose me. So here's the story. If you want to hear my whole story,
Definitely.
Story. So I was teaching jiu-jitsu, and I was well respected and known, and I was a good fighter. Through, like I say, through high school, whatever, I had my fights. I could fight. And for me, effectiveness was always the main thing about martial arts. It was always about, it has all these benefits for you. It has health benefits. It has psychological benefits, confidence benefits, all kinds of benefits. But for me, and still today, it's about, can you defend yourself? You know, what is, and I have a lot of thoughts about, you know, what different styles, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit. But for me, that was always the bottom line. And so what happened was I was teaching at what was basically a fencing center, but they had a matted room where I was able to just kind of have a class. I never aspired to teach jiu-jitsu or martial arts professionally. At the time, I was trying to become a professional musician. Then after that, I wanted to work in the nonprofit space to help animals, which is what I've been doing for my whole career now. And I just felt like I wanted to keep martial arts as my fun passion, not as my, I got to go to work today kind of thing.
Right.
So it really, and plus that's what was modeled for me from Jack Secchi. My original instructor, it was like $6 every 6 months to register for the community center. And then you bought your gi, and he refused to be paid because his thing was, I don't want to owe you anything. Like, you pay me, I owe you something. Like, no, you don't, I don't work for you. I'm teaching because I love jiu-jitsu. I'm accepting you as a student because I want to teach you. And if you do something that I don't like, I'm going to tell you to leave. And I really appreciated that. So I had that ethic. I accepted no money. I wanted people just to come. I wanted to teach because I wanted to teach. And I had that kind of class when one day a guy walked in who was this big guy, kind of mean looking, watched the class, and I kind of had him in the corner of my eye, like, oh, this is interesting. And after the class, he said, hey, can I grapple you? And I'm like, sure, what are the rules? And he's like, no punching, just, jiu-jitsu grappling to submission. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And I didn't ask him anything. I didn't ask him, who are you? What do you know? He was a big guy. He was athletic. He was younger than me. And he gave me a hard time. And we grappled around. And, maybe a couple minutes in, I got around to his back and I choked him out, which is what I was good at doing. But I was impressed. He was strong and athletic and clearly knew what he was doing. And so I said to him, you're good. Like, how long have you been training? And he said 3 months, which I did not believe. And I know he had wrestled. I mean, he was a good athlete. He had some skills, but he said he'd been training for 3 months. And I said, where? And he said, with this guy named Rickson Gracie. That was the first I had ever heard of anything Gracie. I'd never heard of that. And this would have been around, like 1990, something like that. And so they had only been in LA for a couple of years. And I said, what's the deal with that? And he said, oh, these guys, they're really great. They're from Brazil. They've got this $100,000 challenge. And he went there to beat the guy to get the 100,000, lost to Rickson, became a student. And then he said, but I think you should take the challenge, David. You might be able to beat him, which of course now I know is laughable at the time that he would even think that. But he was apparently impressed with me too. But he left me with this videotape, which was this iconic videotape they were circulating back then, which I'm sure you've heard of, called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Action.
Yep.
And it was this compilation tape of a lot of their Vale Tudo, no rules fights in Brazil. And it was impressive. Like, I watched it, I thought, geez, these guys are tough. But looking at the video, it was like, yeah, they're doing jiu-jitsu, right? They shoot in on a guy, they take him down, they jump onto Tateshi Hogatami, which is now known as the Mount, and they, execute an armbar when the person's flailing, or smack them and get them to turn their back and then choke them out. I thought they're tough guys, but I didn't really appreciate it. But I thought, you know what, I should call this Hickson guy. I mean, he lives down the other side of LA, and, maybe take a lesson from him. So I called him, got him on the phone. He was super nice. He said he'd be happy to, teach me a private lesson. And I remember him saying, I think he said $100 for a lesson, or it was maybe a little bit more. And at that time, we're talking like 1990, like that's how much you'd pay for like 2 months of training.
That's a lot.
It just seemed like, are you kidding me? So I thought, yeah, I'm sure he's good, but he's not that good. Right. Mm-hmm. And which in fact he was, and my life would have been interesting had I taken that lesson. But so I shrugged that off and said, okay, well, there's this really great jiu-jitsu guy and these Gracie people who are in LA. That's cool. And I kind of ignored it. And then maybe 2 months later, I was again teaching my class, and an old student of mine came back to me. He's someone that I had trained a few years before, who had been training at that time with the Gracie family, but it was cousins of theirs. I mean, they're all cousins, right? Everybody is somebody's cousin. But the Machado brothers, their mother is Gracie. So it's the exact same family. They just don't happen to have that Gracie last name because it's through their mother and not through their father. And they had grown up in the same house in Terrazopolis and did summers and, fighting with Hickson and Henzo, and they were all the same family. And they were here, and he said, oh, you've got to meet this guy, Higan Machado. He's my coach. And I wrestled my ex-student. And again, I beat him, but had the same experience. Like, holy cow, like you've gotten really, really good. And he said, you have no idea, David, you got to come meet this guy, Higan Machado. So that's why I say the school found me. So, and I said, I'm kind of put off by this $100,000 challenge thing, because it's just kind of like not my scene to be that kind of puffery. Right. I mean, I get the family was trying to make a name for themselves, so like no judgment there. But it's just like, it just didn't seem, I don't know, it just seemed unseemly to me to say, hey, we will beat anybody. Come on in. We'll give you $100,000 if you can beat us. All challengers are welcome. Yep. So I liked that Higan was not issuing that challenge. That was coming from Horian and Hickson. Yeah. And so I went. It took me a few weeks to kind of get my schedule jiggered up to when I could go to where their school was. And their school was not far from me. It was in a place in Southern California, in the valley called Encino. And it was in a shopping center called Wall Street Village. I don't know if you know, you do know who Bob Wall is. Oh, yeah. So Bob Wall, great martial artist, the bad guy in Enter the Dragon, the villain. He became a real estate developer, and he had this development of shopping kind of center development called Wall Street Village. And he had gotten connected with the Machado brothers through Chuck Norris, who was a friend of his, and basically gave them space in his shopping center so they could have a proper school. And that was not far from me. So one night I went down there to just see, okay, what the hell is going on with this Higan Machado guy? And that night was a terrible rainy night. And the Machados lived like across town. It was just really bad rain, and they weren't able to make it. And they asked a student of theirs who was staying in that area, because I think he was staying with Richard Norton. This is a guy named John Will. Okay. And Richard lived right near there. And so John Will was teaching the class. Now, John Will was wearing a purple. I didn't know who John Will was, just some guy from Australia, wearing a purple belt. So when I walked into class, I thought, oh, shoot. I came all this way. I got someone else to teach my class. I'm here at night. The guy I want to meet's not even here. And now there's some purple belt teaching the class. I'm a black belt. I'm going to sit. So I said, hey, listen, I'm a black belt, but why don't I just put on a white belt for this class? Because I don't know your style. And he said, that's great. He taught the class, which was really good. He was teaching excellent stuff on the ground. And then we grappled, and he tapped me out 50 times. I mean, he was so much better than me. Wow. And I remember just being so stunned, like my world was like, I'm a good fighter. I'm good at jiu-jitsu. Like, I've been doing this since I was 6 years old. What is going on? And he just had so much mastery of leverage and timing and all of the things that Brazilian jiu-jitsu teaches you. And he was a purple belt. And I remember saying to him, okay, if you're a purple belt, how good are the black belts? And he kind of laughed and said, like, you're going to have to see for yourself. You got to come back. So we became instant friends. John Will, who trained for many years with Richard Norton, was out here training for a couple of months. He would basically take it in doses, right? He lived in Australia. He's this Don Drager type guy who traveled through Southeast Asia, lived in Thailand, lived in Indonesia, did pencak silat, did all these things. And he actually started Australia's first martial arts magazine called Blitz. And it was through that he would travel and discover these new styles and heard of the Gracies and had come out and taken some privates with Horry and Gracie and got connected up with Higgin. So by that point, he was already a purple belt. He had been coming out for a month, every few months for a couple of years. And the next night I came back, Higgin was there. And I just remember this guy about my size, a little bit bigger than me. This is a young Higgin Machado. I was, 1990. I was maybe 28, 29. He was probably 25, 24. And his English wasn't very good, but he was so nice and so friendly. And then he proceeded, when we grappled, to just, I can't explain it, toy with me. Like, he could beat me without using his hands. He could triangle me with his legs. He could flip me over with his legs. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm all about realistic fighting here. And I understand that, I've always understood that this is a one-on-one match. We are not striking. We're on a soft mat. I don't have to worry about other people. Like, I understand the limitations of how we practice different arts, and I pay close attention to that always. But I had to say to myself, if I decided to change the rules right now and start throwing some strikes, or start eye gouging, or try to, get him in a neck break, or get his fingers, or whatever, it occurred to me that I would not be able to do that. I was in such control by him that if I tried to do that to him, I don't think it would have worked. And he could just do it back to me 10 times better because he was in complete control. Wow. And that's where a light bulb went off for me to say, oh, because I would compete, but I was always very aware of all of the things we are not doing to facilitate our ability to combat each other with resistance and be able to do it again tomorrow. And you have to do that. You have to place rules, or people are just going to get hurt. But I kind of shied away from sport because I felt like, and I'm sure you've heard this before, sport, you rehearse things that are not lethal.
Right.
And that's true. But what my eyes were open to that day is, but the non-lethal yet still very effective and damaging things you do rehearse, you get really good at. And you can always add back in the lethal stuff if you want to train that as well. And so that's when that light bulb went off. And it did not take long for me to then close down my class and put on a white belt and start over in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So that, I really feel like I didn't pick the school, the situation picked me.
Oh, so you completely closed your school then? Okay. I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah. Oh, why would I had to? I had nothing, there was maybe a couple of months where I kept it going. And I remember John Will, I brought him in to teach at my school. That was interesting because he also was a phenomenal in stand-up styles and he's the most explosive striker I have ever met. And I've trained with a lot of really great strikers in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But he came in and he taught some classes in stand-up stuff. And I remember I had a Kyokushin karate guy who was really tough, who was training jiu-jitsu with me. That's a very hard style, yeah. As I'm sure you know, no padding, and they would just hit each other. And he asked, John taught this style, and John had trained a bit in that, but had just trained full contact everything. And he kept saying, let's spar, let's spar, let's spar. And so at the end of the class, John said, you really want to spar? And he said, yeah. I said, are you sure? You really want to spar with me? And the guy said, yeah. And so they squared off. And I remember John saying are you ready? And the guy saying, I'm ready. And it was almost like, John was like, are you sure you're ready? And they said, go. And John exploded onto this guy without hurting him. I want to say tapping him with punches and kicks. He must have got off 10 punch, kick, drove the guy into the corner of the room. And the guy never could throw a strike. He was just blitz, like the title of his magazine. Wow. John was explosive and great. And I thought, okay, if he is training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, clearly he sees a value here, and that value was very apparent to me. And so then, one day I walked into class and I had already gotten some of my students involved over there. And I said, listen, guys, there's a better style over there. I mean, I think you've learned a lot from me. You got other jiu-jitsu schools where you can learn some of the stuff I'm teaching now. I need to go and master this other style, and I highly recommend you come with me. And a number of my students did. I brought as many as I could over to Higgin.
And how long did you stay with him?
I'm still with him.
Still? Okay.
Even though I've moved. Yeah, Higgin is my coach. I stayed with Higgin and his brothers. They all eventually came over from Brazil. Jean-Jacques Machado, John, Carlos, and Roger. Mm-hmm. I trained with them until I left Los Angeles. So all the way through black belt and more. Then in 2005, I got my black belt to, I don't know, 1997, very quick, or 1986, I think, very quickly for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like unheard of quickly, maybe 5 years,
Yeah.
6 years. But I had that lifetime of Jiu-Jitsu experience coming into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I trained every day. I had this ethic, first in, last off, meaning I would be there right when they opened the door, get on the mat, start rolling with people, not take water breaks, keep drilling as long as I could keep drilling, always be the last one to roll, be the last one out the door, never say no to a match. If I'm super tired and someone says, can you go? The answer is always yes.
Wow.
And so I got good. And then when I left, I moved up to Northern California. I started training with Cesar Gracie Fight Team and Nick and Nate Diaz and Jake Shields and Gil Melendez. But Higgin, so I'm kind of a free agent and have been for a long time. I'm friends with everybody, hopefully enemies with nobody, but Higgin is my coach.
Very cool. So do you teach at all yourself anymore, or did you completely give that up?
So you mentioned in your introduction the curriculum that John and I created. So around, I don't know, maybe 1999, there were some guys who were coming in to get private lessons, maybe even earlier than that, to get private lessons from Jean-Jacques Machado, who was one of my coaches, and he didn't have time. And so he passed them off to me. And one of those guys' names was Fariborz Azak. He's a very well-known and well-respected Hapkido instructor in Los Angeles. And Fariborz is a very phenomenal martial artist, but also a really great martial arts business person and just a great human being, just the greatest human being. And we became friends. And he started to say to me, David, this was, I think the UFC had begun. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was suddenly in hot demand around the country in the US, but there were no Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructors. And if they were in Florida or California, and they didn't speak very much English. So Fariborz was saying, David, you have this unique skill. You're a good instructor. You speak English. You know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, you should create a curriculum and sell it on, back then it was VHS, sell it on videos and create manuals, and I will help you market it. I will help you with the martial arts associations. And he was on me to do this for like a year. And I didn't even know where I would begin. But I had my buddy John Will in Australia, who had already created a grappling curriculum that he was using in his schools, and he had a whole association he was building out there. So eventually John came out to California. We worked out the curriculum. We worked it out with Fariborz. Fariborz gave us space to take photos. Ron Balicki, who we knew from Dan Inosanto, Ron is Dan's son-in-law. Yep. Ron was also operating a videography company at the time. So Ron got behind the cameras. We had like different camera angles, and we created this grappling curriculum, which we then sold at, it was then called NATMA, this National Martial Arts something, that then merged with Century and Meyer. See, these are like professional associations for martial arts. And we would go to the conventions there and sell videotapes. And that's where we would sort of sell this curriculum. So what that did, even though I was not teaching at a school, what I was actually doing at that time was building my nonprofit, which became adoptapet.com, Humane America. But there was no money at that time for me. So we'd go to the convention once a year. We would sell, 30, 40 curriculums. We'd keep selling them throughout the year. Those instructors who bought this grappling curriculum, we didn't call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because we wanted to keep it generic as grappling because there was no ranking involved. They would have us, if it was in Europe or Australia, it would be Don going out. If it was in the US or sometimes Europe, it would be me, or Mexico, it would be me doing seminars. And we started to build this client base of martial arts instructors, taekwondo instructors, hapkido instructors, karate instructors, who had this grappling curriculum that they were offering as a grappling class. And they would pay for me to come out and do the seminar. They would pay. And that was my living. That's how I made a living to do my daytime work, which was helping animals. So I never did start a school.
Okay.
Once we wound that down, once my animal stuff started paying for itself through corporate sponsorship and stuff, which would have been around, the early 2000s, I basically backed off of teaching privates and have just been competing and teaching. If someone wants to have me out for a seminar and they're a friend and they really bug me enough, I will go do that. Or I'm on the board of a nonprofit here that teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's called Tough Love Fitness in Oakland, California. It teaches to underserved communities, people of color, people of, the LGBTQ community, women. And I will go and teach a seminar for them now and again. But basically, I am mostly just training with phenomenal partners now and continuing to compete and fight in world championships, things like that.
Very cool. And what made you decide to write your first book?
So That was the training for competition for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. That was Black Belt Magazine came to me again because I was one of the first Americans to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is now referred to as the Dirty Dozen. Fun fact: that guy I keep mentioning, John Will from Australia, he coined that term. We were eating dinner. It was in Los Angeles. We were training. And he had come out and I had just gotten my black belt. He got his black belt not long after. He became the first Australian to ever receive a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he said, we got to have a name for this. I mean, this is the guy who had created Blitz magazine. And I think by that time sold it, but he understands marketing. And he said, this is so cool that like we are here at a part of history and we need like a cool name to refer to the original people. And he said, I think the Dirty Dozen. And I just thought he's being funny, right? But then he said that in some article for Black Belt Magazine, and then it got picked up for his Blitz magazine and Black Belt Magazine, and then it got picked up. So fun fact, John Will coined that term. But anyways, because of that, people would come to us, because sometimes, first of all, the Machados, my coaches, weren't available to do things. And secondly, if something required a mastery of English, like writing a book, they could do it. Carlos Machado's English was very, very good at that time. He was actually an attorney from Brazil. But they came to me and said they were interested. I felt that I had something to say about competition specifically because I did a lot of competing and I found competing to be very interesting. I had my own reasons for doing it that I could share if you want, but the whole competition animal is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And it exposes interesting things about yourself. And so I wrote the book. Another fun fact, I was supposed to head down, they provided me with an editor. That was a painful process, Brian, because I wasn't a good writer, but I knew what I wanted to say. And every time I would like turn in a chapter, it would come back to me like rewritten a little bit so that it flowed better.
Yeah.
But would like lost like what the thing I was trying to say. Like I said what I wanted to say, and then I'd have to like re-edit it. But anyway, I was supposed to go down for the shoot for the book, for the photos. And I was going to go down with Jake Shields, who's a very successful MMA fighter, a good friend of mine. Very supportive on the animal stuff. He happens to be a vegetarian since birth, interestingly. And he got like ringworm or something, staph infection like the day before we were supposed to head down. And so instead I had to swap in another very capable person. There's a guy named Adam Trainer, who is the son of one of my black belts. Adam Trainer is a great jiu-jitsu black belt in his own right. And he has been a defensive tactics instructor for the Los Angeles or the Culver City Sheriff's Department. I may be getting that wrong, but he's been, so law enforcement, jiu-jitsu, tough as nails. He came down and was my dummy for the photos, but it was supposed to be Jake Shields. But so it was Black Belt Magazine who did that. They published the book and that was great. And it's still out there.
Very cool. Yeah. I will definitely put a link for that out there too when it comes out.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about your website. It's not specifically a martial arts website, but the smarterdiet.com. Just talk a little bit about what people can find on there and what it's about.
So I mentioned that I'm an animal person, like so many of us. I love animals. I became a vegetarian, stopped eating meat at least back in like 1985. And then a few years later became fully plant-based.
Wow.
And that has worked well for me. I do it. I think it's a very healthy way for me to eat, but I do it because I don't like the way animals are treated in the food system. That's all. And so I don't talk much about it. Look, I've got friends who are hunters and whatever. It's like, to each his own, but I believe that nobody really wants to support cruelty. And so if they just understood more about that, they might want to back off of it. And I think one thing that holds some people back is this feeling that I have to consume, meat every day to be healthy. And I know that that's not true. You can be healthy, but you don't have to. And so I wanted to be a little bit, use my voice a little bit more to get people to at least consider that. And what was really happening was I would go to competitions and win, or I would train on the mat. And keep in mind, I'm 62 years old now, and I still train with everybody, young guys. And people are always asking me, how are you in such good shape? Or are you not tired yet? Things like that. And I will always say, listen, I think a big part of it is my diet. And I mean, ultimately, it's not just what you eat, it's do you work out hard, right? But I feel like the diet really supports my health. And it obviously doesn't have to be eating no meat. It could just be eating less meat or less dairy or whatever. But so I got that question so often. And then when I would say, well, I think it's your diet, try reducing meat. And then a lot of my fighter friends would do that. And they would say, oh my God, I feel great. I can train for longer. I have more energy after eating. I kind of felt like, hey, maybe there's something here I should share. And so I created this website with some videos talking about just my point of view on sort of the different reasons you might consider eating less meat. And that's really what the Smarter Diet is. I also had a website I put up that I don't maintain called fuelforthefighter.com. And I did that when Jake Shields, that friend I mentioned, was having a title fight with George St. Pierre in the UFC. Mm-hmm. And so Jake was getting a lot of media coverage at the time. And as I mentioned, Jake had never eaten meat in his life. He's a lifetime vegetarian, but he's not super articulate about talking about that and doesn't really have the time to. It's just sort of a thing. So I had hoped that, if I just say, hey, Jake, when people interview you, just point them to this website, Fuel for the Fighter, and there they can get more information. And that's why I created that and got some of my fighter friends. Nate Diaz is vegan, so is Nick. Although I didn't get it finished right about the time for the fight, so it never quite got the exposure that I wanted. But all it is me just asking people to keep an open mind. And I know nobody wants to support cruelty to animals. And right. I figure, hey, if people think that they could be healthy and eat a little less animals or eat a little less dairy or whatever they can, and why not give it a shot? That's all.
Cool. I love it. And like I said, I will definitely put links for that out there too. That's something cool you're doing. And I definitely support. I mean, I'm a dog lover, and we've owned 2 dogs in our life, and we've adopted both of them. So I've never believed in going to like a pet store and buying a dog. I'm just not about that. But we've had 2 rescue dogs in our life. Our first one was with us for almost 16 years, and we've had our current one for almost 7 years, I think. So.
Well, there you go. And you mentioned in the intro, I did create adoptopet.com, this big pet adoption website that is a searchable database of pets in every shelter in the US and in Canada. So you know what the through line on there, Brian, is for martial arts and helping animals, for me is literally the underdog. It's like, I don't like bullies. I don't like people who abuse their power over others. And that is abuse their power over people or abuse their power over animals. I don't like animal cruelty. And so that to me makes perfectly good sense. And this whole ethic that I mentioned of me being in the martial arts to be a good fighter, that's very, very central to me. And I try to take the lessons that I've learned in Jiu Jitsu about grappling, about leverage and tipping points and when to push and when to pull and ego and how to fight from the bottom. And I use that all in my advocacy beyond martial arts. But at the end of the day, I think, like, as I say, many people can come from many things. The martial arts has a lot to offer to many people. Confidence for kids, discipline, balance, flexibility, peace of mind, whatever. It's all wonderful and it's all legitimate. For me, it's about being a good fighter. And to me, that's a very broad question because being a good fighter entirely depends on what is the situation of the fight that you are presented with. Right. So when we talk about, is jiu-jitsu better for fighting, or is taekwondo better for fighting, or is just MMA better for fighting? My immediate question is always like, what fight are you talking about? And so, if you're in a situation, I don't know, on an airplane, where you're limited in terms of your movement, or, or if you're at a crowded bar and chairs are flying or something, I think anything is good, but it's a different situation than one-on-one on a mat, than one-on-one in an alley. I'm sure, you hear, so I'm a big proponent of grappling, obviously, but I'm well aware that you don't want to be tied up on the ground. If you don't have to be, you don't know that the person doesn't have 3 friends that are going to just start kicking you in the head. Yep. And frankly, the ground is concrete usually, which means it's going to hurt. So a lot of the things we do in grappling, posting on the head, driving your knees into the ground, you modify that. So I have this thing I call circle of training, and there's a real fight, whatever that real fight is, because it's going to be a different real fight. It might be 1-on-1. It might be 1-on-3. It might be someone has a weapon. It might be, who knows what it might be. It might be when you're injured. It might be right after you just were running. It might be you are having to not just defend yourself, but to defend your wife and your child. And you got to modify things in that case, right? Mm-hmm. So there's all of these kinds of situations that different kinds of training can prepare you for. And so I feel like the center of this imaginary circle is the real fight, whatever that fight might arise to be. And around it is a big circle. And on that circle are all the different attributes and skills and styles that you can train that might be applicable to that fight. So yes, you should be able to grapple. Yes, you should be able to knock someone out with a single punch, especially against multiple fighters. You've got to change the odds very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need to be able to handle yourself, both holding a knife or defending a knife as much as possible, even though it's very difficult to defend, especially against a skilled knife fighter. Yes, you need to, on the great situation where someone pulls a gun, brings it close enough that you can touch it, that would be great if that was that situation. You need to be able to deal with that. Yes, you need to be fit. You need to be strong. More strength helps. More flexibility helps. More speed helps. More balance helps. Sticks. All of that is, to me, the circle around which you shore up the circle around the center so that if you go into the center and you're pushed in any direction like that, you're at least not caught completely off guard. To me, that's the thing. So you've got some grappling. You've got some punching and kicking. You don't have to be an expert at everything. But then if you're an expert at something, that's good too. Like if you're really good at, and by the way, part of that is also just the emotional training of handling the situation, which to me is a huge component, is in our martial arts schools, we are, even when we're training, when it's tough, we're not really scared for our lives. And we all know the situation where someone who has a lot of, technical training freezes up in a real situation, which can happen. And that's just because real situations are scary and unpredictable, and you sort of have to train that too. And that's why I always ran towards competition. Even though it's not a real fight, even though I'm not really scared, it's a way to simulate that adrenaline. And it's just very different experience than the normal training in the class. So I like the competition experience. I like fighting people who are going aggressively. I don't know them. I like training. You may have heard of model mugging or impact or fast defense. Love that style of training where you just have kind of static scenarios and someone's really padded and you can work really explosive things. I love training situational training. I think that's really underdone in the martial arts. That would be stuff that I learned through my buddy John Will in Australia that I think he got through Jeff Thompson in England, who was a bouncer. Basically, I don't know if you've heard the concept of like setting a fence. So the concept there is one of the biggest problems martial artists have, and I'm sure you've had other people talk about this too, in a fight, and you've probably encountered it too, in a fighting situation is we tend to have a referee, take your stance, ready, set, the bell rings. We're both fighting. We know we're both fighting. We're prepared. Got it. And we know the rules. Yeah. And in unpredictable life situations, one of the hardest things is you don't know if the fight is on or not. In fact, if someone really wants to hurt you, their whole goal is to be sure you don't know the fight is on.
Yep.
So they're going to kick you over the head before you get a chance to do something. They're going to jump out at you, or they're going to be talking to you and negotiating, getting closer to you, or they're going to be getting angrier, and you're going to be assessing like, is this a fight? Is this not a fight? Can I talk? So having skills into how to both diffuse a situation and, take someone's attention completely away, or how to assess, is there a fight, and if there or not, and if there is a fight, to get the first strike in is hugely important. And so the whole concept of the fence is you can stand with your hands up, with your hands extended out like you're Italian, talking with your hands, but palms facing up, so it feels unthreatening. It's not a fighting stance. It's palms facing up, but I'm extending my lead hand, let's just say, because I take an orthodox stance, my left hand out and say, hey man, please, I don't have a problem with you. And is he touching my hand? Is he swatting at my hand because my fingers are out there? Is he grabbing at me? Is he puffing his chest and bumping into my hand? So if I say, please don't come closer, and I'm getting that tactile message that I'm asking this guy not to come closer, I'm asking him to calm down, I'm even backing away, and he is contacting my hand, he's trying to invade my space, that to me is a symbol that the fight is on. Like, don't wait till he throws the first strike. He is trying to negotiate a position that's threatening for me. And so that is my signal to misdirect him, and I throw the first strike. And that first strike can be directed to take him down. That first move can be directed to send him into a wall, so that if I do want to turn and make space and hightail it out of there, I know I'm going to have a significant lead because he's just gotten spun around. Small point, if you don't mind my just going off. Yeah. People say, the best way I deal with a fight is to run. I agree with that with 10 asterisks after that. Like, are you a fast runner? Are you in clothes that you can run in? Are you faster than the person you're running away from? Are you sure you're not just going to get caught and now be out of breath? Are you with your wife and children? You can't run. You have to stay and defend them.
Mm-hmm.
Are you injured? You can't run. So this, if I got in a fight, I would just run is no, that's not, we need to be able to fight. But the option to control a fight and change someone's orientation and set them off their path and maybe even hurt them a little bit, and then use that to immediately disengage to get around a corner, that I think is a great way to disengage. But the point there is you can also have a verbal fence. So you don't have to put your fingers up. And this, you can say, please don't step any closer. And the person keeps coming closer. Please don't step any closer. If they come closer, again, that's a situation that you are in a fight. The bell has rung. And there's legal implications to that of who throws the first strike. But there's the old, adage, rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. So I am a believer in that's part of that circle of training, is understanding how to understand when you're in a fight, and to have the background of all of the areas that fight can take you so that you are a well-rounded fighter. And that is my reason for staying in the martial arts. And that's what I'm all about.
Nice. I like it. So in over 50 years of martial arts, do you have one philosophy you've learned that is at the top of your list?
I would say humility.
Nice.
Humility and honest. There's always someone better than you. There just always is. And it's also how good you are in that moment, at that time, on that day.
Yeah.
That's one of the good things about competition, I feel like. Winning a competition is really nice, but it's kind of meaningless if you think about it. Because all that it means is at that moment, with that rule set and that person or that group of people I had to fight that day, I was superior in those rules at that moment with them. I don't know if they are good. Maybe they're not good. Maybe the best guys didn't show up. Maybe I had a great day. Maybe I had a bad day. Maybe their wife left them that night before. Like, you don't know any of that stuff. All you know is at that moment, I beat that person in this rule set. And at the end of the day, you don't have control over that, right? The person, I kind of think of it as we have our brackets, like the best and the worst we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have some control over fighting at our best on any given day. And the whole reason we train is to move that bracket up. So the best we can do is even better. And the worst we could ever do is still better. But if you come up against somebody whose bracket is clearly ahead of you, meaning the worst they will do on that day is better than the best you could ever do, which would be the case for me fighting Higan Machado or Benny Urquides or whatever, does it mean you lost? I mean, or the flip side of that, if the person is terrible and you win, so it doesn't really mean anything. So I think this humility that there's always somebody better than you, that you are there to learn, that if you are not being beaten, you're not with the right people. You're not learning anything. You're just practicing what you know.
Yeah.
So humility, humility, humility. The Machados literally had it written on the top of their door when you walked in, leave your ego at the door. I completely believe in that.
I like it. All right. I got a few fun questions to wrap up the interview. Now this one,
Sure.
if you were to decide to step into the octagon, what would your walk-up music be?
I try to not take things too seriously.
Uh-huh.
It's funny because, everyone has their nicknames, like, I don't know, my buddy Gil, El Nino, people have their nicknames. I would always want the nickname. I joked I'd be the angry carrot since I'm vegan, right?
Okay.
Just to strike fear into the hearts of nobody. But what would my music be? It would probably be something ironic and funny. I would not take it too seriously because I understand once all the bravado is done, we're going to be in the ring and I'm going to do the best I can do.
Okay.
So it might be something like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, something just to just comedic and like, I am not taking this seriously, to try to get the other person to take me less seriously. Because that's obviously a big part of fighting too, right?
Yeah.
Is to get your opponent to underestimate you.
See, with you, I would think like Underdog. The theme song to Underdog would be a good one.
Something like that, sure.
That'd be fun. All right. Who are 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Yes, I heard you ask this in a couple of other interviews. So you're saying, so when I say personal, so I'm not thinking of like the best martial artists throughout history. I'm kind of thinking of it.
Your opinion, whether it's, people who have maybe influenced you, whether, some people pick well-known people. Some people pick Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. Some people pick only people they've known and trained with. It's completely up to you.
It's interesting because the martial artists who are famous are usually famous for a reason. Sometimes they're just really good self-marketers, but
Mhm.
they're usually very, very good. But there's all kinds of people who are not famous who are also really, really good.
Yes.
Who we've never heard of. And, we've all encountered those kinds of people around the world. But for my personal Mount Rushmore, it would be Jack Secchi, my first instructor.
Nice.
Small physical stature, so mentally tough. I remember, endless stories, but one quick story. The only ever time I recall him showing up late to class, which was bizarre, and we were all worried, like, where is he? And one of his black belts started the class. He walked in 15 minutes late, limping, with his foot bloody. He had stepped on a nail and it went through his foot. And instead of like hobbling over to like a phone or an ambulance or something, he came in, he bandaged up his foot, pulled the nail out, put alcohol on, whatever, taught the class, and then had someone taken to the hospital. So his ethic, so it'd be Jack Secchi. Who else? I think Carlos and Elio Gracie.
Nice.
For what they did with the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I never got a chance to meet either of them. I know Carlos Gracie Jr. very well. Mm-hmm. And following along that line, for me personally, Higan Machado, best grappler I've ever met in the world. Unbelievable. He's a walking encyclopedia. And I might tack on his brother Jean-Jacques. Also, astonishingly great grappler and teacher. And by the way, has no fingers on his left hand.
Wow.
Was born with only like a very small nub. And I'll tell you what, he's fought MMA. You can grapple with him. You will not notice he does not have any fingers on that hand. So he's a hero of mine. And lastly, I think John Will, my friend from Australia, the best instructor I've ever met. I think the best overall fighter I've ever met. He's a real hero of mine.
Okay. All right. Other than yours, favorite martial arts book?
Maybe. So I haven't kept up. This is mostly from my high school and college years, but I think Zen in the Art of Martial Arts.
Nice.
Is it Joe Hyams?
Joe Hyams, yes. It's a favorite of mine. I love it.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it sets people thinking about martial arts in the right way.
Cool. All right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
So I don't own a TV, although in this day of internet streaming, I do. I attribute a lot of my success in getting a lot of shit done in my life, pardon my French, to not owning a TV, especially through the years before the internet, when if you didn't have a TV, you really did have more time.
Yeah.
But David Carradine, Kung Fu.
Okay, good.
I love the spirit of it, and I know, it's not good execution of martial arts.
Yeah.
By the way, I think any TVs and movies, it's entertainment. It's not, that's not where you're going to watch great martial arts movements. You're going to watch great athletes. But David Carradine.
All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
So will you get mad at me if I say, have you ever heard of Kentucky Fried Movie?
Oh yeah. I love it.
Will you get mad at me if I say the segment that they had, the 20-minute or something spoof on Enter the Dragon it was called Fistful of Yen. For your listeners, just full warning. Kentucky Fried Movie is like a comedy. It was a sketch comedy group, Kentucky Fried Theater. It is definitely an R-rated movie. There's a lot of topless. It's a don't show it to your high school age kids. But it's very funny, and they have a 20-minute, I think it's got to be about 20-minute extended spoof of Enter the Dragon called Fistful of Yen, which I just think is so hilarious. I have to say that is my favorite martial arts movie.
That's actually awesome. No, I think the only time I probably get mad at someone is if they said Jim Cotta was their favorite martial arts movie.
No.
All right, final question. Any movie you've ever seen, doesn't have to be a martial arts movie, just a favorite movie fight scene. Just one fight scene that stands out.
So again, I have a couple that come to mind, but again, I don't expect to see reality, because reality would be quite boring to see in a movie. You hit somebody, they fall over, they cry, and the fight's over. So my favorite, as I think about that, two from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Okay.
One is when Paul Newman is articulating the rules of the fight he's about to have with one of his gang members, and he says there'll be none of this and none of that, and he's doing it to him as he's saying there'll be none of it.
Yep.
I like the reality of that. Like, the guy doesn't know the fight is on. And also, it's not really a fight scene, but there's the scene where Robert Redford is being asked to show how good of a shot he is, and and some guy like throws a coin on the ground and tells him to like take aim at it and hit it, and he can't hit it. And then the guy thinks he's a bad shot, but he says, no, wait a minute, I got to move. So he says, okay, move. And he turns around and then spins around and draws his gun and hits it. I love the feeling of like the fakeness of this doesn't work because I'm in reality. And if you give me a real situation, I can work. And that to me is like an example of a fight scene.
That's nice.
I also love, what's it, Billy Jack, the park scene where he says, I'm going to whop you upside the head. There's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Yep.
I just love that scene.
That is cool. I love it. Well, before I let you go, David, is there anything I forgot to ask you about or any last minute parting words you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
First, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a great honor to be speaking to you as a career martial artist and, with your esteemed other guests that you've had. I guess I would say, I think martial arts are at an interesting time right now. I think Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is becoming very sport, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of evolving away from some of its fighting origin. I think MMA and its popularity is really good, but it is, unfortunately, MMA gyms are lacking some of the overt discipline, bowing, things like that I think is really beneficial for kids.
Yep.
And it's a little bit more of just a tough guy scene. And because it's and I live in that world, but because it's a tough guy scene, it's not really accessible to average people. And I think we need martial arts to be accessible to the people who need it most, which is the people who are not yet that tough.
Right.
And who are not now or maybe ever going to become really good fighters. So I hope that the future of martial arts, even as it moves into its various sport forms and evolves in various ways, that there'll always be styles out there that are both really effective as fighting styles and teach some of the core humility and are accessible to average people, because those are the people who need it.
Perfect way to end it. Well, seriously, this has been so much fun. You came recommended from a couple different guests have mentioned your name now, so I had to finally reach out. I'm like, I got to find out who this David Meyer guy is. So I'm glad I reached out. I'm glad we got to talk. It's been so much fun, and I think the listeners are going to like this one.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate it, and I look forward to being in touch.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.